Okay, we are live. We're here for Beard Banter episode 19. I am actually here with Alex Farling, who I've had several interactions with over the last 6 months or so. And we're going to talk about imposter syndrome today. We're going to talk about the conditions as an MSP or the conditions in life that create this feeling of being an imposter in your field or in your expertise, if you will. So, Alex, it's great to have you here. Why don't you do me a favor and the audience a favor? Tell me a little bit about yourself. What's your background and what do you do today? And we'll get started there.
So, I obviously I met you at IT Nation for the first time personally at IT Nation this year, but I've been in the IT channel for going on 18 years, I guess, 16 and a half owning an MSP. And now I've exited the MSP and I'm one of the co-founders over at Lifecycle Insights. We're focusing
do
on.
you go to a 12-step program to
I-
reaffirm your decisions of leaving the
I don't,
MSP?
when you leave an MSP, I don't feel like you need anything. Do you remember the old Toyota commercial where the guy walks across the parking lot, jumps up and clicks his heels and keeps on going?
Sure.
That's what I feel like.
That's where you're at. That's the stage of enlightenment.
And but it all goes into today's topic and we'll talk about it. But,
Sure.
I didn't even plan to sell the MSP. It just kind of happened. I got a good offer and it was when time was uncertain and everything was crazy in the middle of COVID, and the right opportunity presented itself. So I took it. And it's kind of how I started the business too. I kind of bought it on accident. So it seems to be my MO of, just fumbling along and figuring it out as we go.
Yeah.
Awesome beard. There's an awesome beard.
Yeah, we're getting some great conversations.
This is the imposter
right?
beard. This is the imposter.
No, but yours is clean and tight. Like yours would pass muster, right? Like mine doesn't pass muster in general. But I love this. I try to impersonate Matt Lee whenever possible. Yeah. I'd be careful. There's drawbacks to that one. You gotta look around corners.
Right.
There's all kinds of things that come into play. One of the things that you said you developed a company that guides MSPs down kind of QBRs, right, and walking them through building their practice and making it better. Presumably coming from your 16 years or so of being an MSP. How did that happen? Like, tell me the story on that.
Yeah, so at my MSP, we started when we got big enough to have a dedicated account manager, and we did it earlier than most, because I realized that a dedicated account manager would cross-sell additional products, upsell customers.
100%.
We would just have a better experience. I started with a really technical account manager, and he was fine. He was able to do the job. He was able to bring it down to English and translate for folks pretty well, but he struggled sometimes. And one of the things I struggled with was keeping him dialed in, right? Keeping him out of the technical, not talking about the flux capacity.
Do you mean focusing on the business objective of the conversation and what's in it for me?
As opposed to the technical problem, right? He wanted to talk about the widget.
So us nerds have a tendency to do that as a default behavior.
But as the company grew, I had the opportunity to hire a director of account management from a $30 million MSP. They were way bigger than me. But they had made some mistakes. When they made some mistakes, they lost some revenue. When they lost some revenue, the first thing they did was cut their account management team.
Which is where the revenue is going to come back from potentially.
Right. I think it was a stupid move. But I went out and hired this girl who made more money than me every year. But she was fantastic. She was amazing. But she wasn't technical. And here I am trying to get the same output from a non-technical human and from a technical human. So what we built was the training wheels to help both of those two people ride the same train track and get to the same result. Right.
And I like the term of ride the same train track in the sense of, they're not ever going to meet in the middle. But the guidance is to say, hey, listen, it needs to be technical enough to get people to understand what we're going to be selling them.
I like it
to
be
just
bumper
not.
There
you go.
Either one of them
bumpers.
I don't want either one of them in their respective gutter. I want them both headed the same direction. And that's just what you're going to get when you have a bunch of different people doing the same job. You're going to get differences of opinion, especially when it's not a highly policy defined job. When you get in there and talk business outcomes with your customer, they can take you any direction they want, and you have to kind of keep them in line along the process. So, and I never really intended to work at this company. When we started Lifecycle Insights, I was full-time running an MSP. And I said to them, I'll help you with industry guidance. I will. My business partners were looking for a problem to solve, and I gave it to them. And I said, I'll help you market, and I'll do some of the stuff. But for the most part, I got to run this company. And that aged really well. 2.5 years later, here I am. And but I'm having a blast.
Made a similar transition myself in recent years, right? In the same, Sean's questioning your actual validity of said beard, but
it's real.
You've been growing this, This was in preparation for our conversation, like as we talked about before.
So when COVID happened, I was driving back and forth to Delaware. Still, I live in Maryland, like an hour away. I was driving back and forth to Delaware. My MSP was 3 doors down from a hair salon.
Sure.
And they only had 2 computers in the whole hair salon. So we fixed their computers for free. They cut my hair for free. It was a done deal. We didn't worry
It's
about it.
win-win.
This
And as you
this
lost
worked for
hair, it
15
became
years.
a ROI for them. Yeah, I
This
would
worked
say.
for 15 years, but my hairline was receding, and then it started looking shaggy in COVID. And my fiance says, "Just cut it. Just cut your hair." And I went. She says, "Just shave your head." And I went, "Not going to happen." And she goes,
Yeah.
"Just." And finally, she talked me into it. So I shaved my head, and when I shaved my head, we decided I needed something to and so that's when this really started.
You know, the only downside to
This is my
shaving your
COVID
head
beard that never went away.
is when you do that, and now you have a TV studio or production you go into. They hand you these little wipes, and they ask you to wipe the
The
oil.
oils off your head.
Yeah. Anyways, I digress.
I'm not
So,
that fancy. Yeah.
so what we're going to talk about today is imposter syndrome, right? And that definition is this understanding that, highly functional people or people in a role question whether or not it's all somewhat of this, I guess, farce, right? Like,
Yeah.
imagine you're on a mission and you think it's a valid mission, but you also then immediately go, maybe I'm an idiot. Maybe I have no idea what I'm talking about. Maybe I'll be found to be an imposter. Maybe I'll be found to be disingenuous in my capabilities. And that's one that just strikes super home to me. So when you suggested that topic, I was really excited to talk about it. Do you mind kind of introducing why you thought of that topic for me? Like, give me
Well,
a kind of rundown.
well, yeah. I mean, we were at IT Nation, and we were at the after party,
The
or whatever they
rooftop
call it, the
party.
rooftop
Yeah,
party.
yeah.
Yeah. And I come walking up on you and Slagle, and you guys are sitting there having a conversation about this topic.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, as somebody who comes from a sales background, right? I was
Right.
technical enough to be dangerous, maybe not technical enough to be good. As somebody who comes from a sales background, to come sit down next to the 2 of the people who, when they talk, I listen, hearing them say, I suffer from some of the same stuff you do,
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
kind of turned it in perspective for me. Because if you want to go talk about sales, great, I'll have that conversation all day, and I
Sure.
feel like an expert in it. Part of the reason I sold the MSP was I was afraid that, and you know where every chink in your own armor is, right? And it helps you
Oh,
kind
you
of.
hope you do. Yeah.
Well, yeah. Well, and even if you do, even if you don't know where all of them are, you know where enough of them are that you look at it and say, at what point does one card fall and the whole house come down, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
and as my MSP, I looked at that, and we fell into some of the same traps as others, that we buy more products and implement more products to try and be more secure.
Yeah.
We did a lot of things. I mean, we were removing admin rights in 2004. We did a lot of things right, but I don't think, when I ran the MSP, I don't think I knew how right it was.
Yeah.
I didn't have visibility into hundreds of other MSPs. And now that I do, I look back and go, we really weren't that terrible at it. But I was petrified. Like, it kept me up at night, that we would be the MSP who got breached and who didn't survive. And when I got an offer, I went, heck, I can get out of this. And Lifecycle Insights is busy and taking off, and I have a job, because I'd spent a decade thinking I was going to retire out of this MSP I had built. You kind of get into that rut. So, when you guys were sitting there talking about it, I just went, man, that so rings home to me. And even in my new job, I've left the MSP space, and now we talk to MSPs about how to do quarterly business reviews. Well, what do I know about that? I'm a guy who ran a moderate-sized MSP, nothing to write home about. The only thing I know about it is what I've learned about it over the last 4 or 5 years, studying to be the subject matter expert on it.
So I think there's your point. So before we get deep into this, like, what is my understanding of imposter syndrome, and kind of chat through that, I want to talk about, like, that is the point. I have channeled my own imposter syndrome ever since it started. And don't get me wrong, I was a 19-year-old kid that got my Series 7 66 LHVA and was selling financial securities products in suspenders, right? As a 19-year-old, right? And so, like, I've kind of always lived in this space where I'm doing something I shouldn't be doing. I'm doing something where I don't have validation points, which aids in kind of imposter syndrome. And I've always channeled it to do exactly what you just said. I'm so afraid of being found to be an imposter that I spend all my time gathering the information, looking for loop backs, looking for ways to prove that I know what I'm talking about, looking for ways to test my data, or looking for ways. Well, what's funny is you talk about that, channeling that actually makes you quite the subject matter expert, right?
It really does. and yet I think the same personality that made you go out and do all that homework and address all those things makes you almost unable to see through the fact that you've slowly but surely built up a skill set, even though maybe there's nothing on paper that says you have that skill set.
And,
right?
and that's
Maybe
part of
no
what's
validation.
insidious about it. I was talking to my wife about this in preparation for this call, and kind of trying to define, like, what is the rails of imposter syndrome, right? I mean, everybody kind of goes through a part of it where you feel like, perhaps you're not good enough, or you feel like you've stepped into something you're outside of your shoes on. But what are the rails that, like, define imposter syndrome? And for me, it's a kind of a combination of these things. It's you have no validation structure, right? For example, my son started at a grocery store, and he's doing the online order, pre-picking and delivery. He's got a metric that says whether he's successful or not. If you do
Right.
this in under 50 seconds per pick, you're good. That's the number. That's where you need to be. So he has an immediate feedback loop. So the first condition for imposter syndrome for me is a lack of an immediate quantifiable feedback loop,
Yeah.
right? You have no direct even sales doesn't directly correlate to efficacy, right? Even having revenue doesn't, in your world, if you take lifecycle insights, prove that you actually are teaching anything valuable that improves their value right away.
Well, no, I mean, not to
right?
knock on anybody specifically, but we got a lot of vendors in this space who have sold something that wasn't that much, didn't have that much value, and made a lot of revenue. You know, so we struggle with that. We look at it and go, you know, every day we're looking at it going, how do we tweak this one little thing to deliver more value so that nobody can see that behind the scenes, maybe we didn't deliver all that value.
Chaos, and we're not good enough, and we're not where we want to be. And
and
you have that. And then also, this is the second condition, right? I think imposter syndrome starts with this inability to prove to oneself that you have some metric. That's why when you are in the second set of conditions, if you're on the avant-garde side of the delivery of some product or service, if you are the first MSP that wants to be a security-focused MSP, if you are a person out here proselytizing about what it takes to become secure, and you don't know that that's actually how you teach someone, right? Kind of in my world. And so you see this in the first condition being there's no validation structure. The second condition being high functioning, high desire of success people that are saying, I want to make the best QBR. I want to educate MSPs. I want them to be successful down at the end, and defining that success extremely far out, right?
Being a perfectionist is a son of a bitch.
Yeah.
It really
is.
There's
your two precursor conditions, right? That's there. And I think as long as those are present, then you have the third aspect of this, which is whether or not you can actually measure someone else's success in correlation to the effort, right? And I think that's the piece where you probably have found your best grounding factor of whether or not you feel like you're being an imposter is when that MSP comes back and goes, man, my strategic sales are massively up. I'm actually getting people to commit to projects. Like that has to be that feedback loop you must find.
That's the thing that makes us feel good. And it definitely validates. And it's honestly something that was missing at the MSP, because what's your validation for understanding security and being secure? You don't get breached.
Yeah.
Right.
Which I'll challenge that just because I have to. I thought about it the first time you said it. And I'll definitely challenge it now. I think the piece that is broken around the security piece. So all the way back to why Alex talks about imposter syndrome is I don't want to be that next MSP. I even wrote an email that said my single greatest fear is that we're the next MSP that's breached, and sent that out to 170 employees, right? Like I was terrified of it. I think the understanding that's coming to fruition in security is that I don't want to be the next MSP that doesn't find a breach quickly, that doesn't have ways to secure themselves afterwards and have a feedback loop to be better next time. And I think
that's
that
not
we
the
made
conversation we were having in 2018 and 2019.
It wasn't as if you get popped, you're in trouble instead of
you're out of business,
hey,
right?
we need some ways. Yeah, right.
I was getting a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. You know?
Right. If I get hit, I'm in trouble. And I'm not saying you should get hit. I'm saying you should do everything you can to protect yourself. Right. But that's why there's protect, detect, respond, recover. Those last three is 3/5 of it, and yet we only talk about 1/5 and maybe 2/5. Yeah. Henry Tim says lack of validation, verification, or representation. And I think he's speaking back towards those conditions for imposter syndrome. And you're right. If I can't turn around and look at someone, for example, let's look at my role at PAX 8. Right, I'll be a little vulnerable here. And at Iconic before this. At Iconic before this, I made this position that, hey, I'm going to go sit on vendors' boards so that I can condition and drive where they go so that our ships go down the same canal without turning sideways, right? This would have been perfect if I'd had the canal example back then, but I didn't, right? Yeah. But if I had been, wanted Iconic to drive the same direction as these vendors, and I figured, hey, if I can get on their boards, if I can get on their advisory roles, if I can get in and shape that and work with their product managers, then I can make it what I needed. I can always be, at the same timeline it's going to take them to build it for me to need it. And so I can get ahead of it. Well, what validation structure do you have there? Percentage of normalcy of what I use the product? Percentage of there's not a validation structure.
But when you're building it, you're building the plane as you're flying it. Essentially, at that point, you're trying to implement the structures that are going to keep you secure while the vendor is developing it. And that's really no different than being at the MSP and trying to deploy all the next security steps and looking around and not knowing how much of that the MSP across the street's doing, how much of that the MSP who did get popped was doing, and how you compare directly one-on-one to them. Like you don't really have a metric for that.
True story.
Since I've come out on the vendor side, now I get to see the inside of a lot of MSPs. And I can see that there's very big MSPs who don't deploy as much of a security stack as we do, or
Right.
don't employ the same processes that we do, or, I see some really scary stuff.
So,
Um,
this takes me into the last condition of this, right?
uh-oh.
In a highly disorganized market where the consumer maturity, the developer maturity, the deployment maturity is so low that you don't have anything to show what is normal. You have no normal defined,
And that's a
right?
problem in the
And
MSP space right now.
100%, especially as you're making this transition from I make efficiency possible, I make efficacy possible, right? MSP's value proposition to customers was I'm your outsourced IT department. I'm going to be faster. I'm going to be more knowledgeable. I'm going to be more efficient. I'm going to keep you up and running proactively. I'm going to do those things. I'm going to take you strategically where your one person could never do that, or your two
Right.
people. Like that's the value prop, right?
Sure.
But now you're driving down that path where MSP isn't defined, right? As an attorney, I know if I win or lose a case based on the laws in that state.
Yeah.
As a doctor, I know whether the condition goes away or not. I have a board of AMA guides that say this is when this condition is no longer present. I have some standards, right? I have, and this is great.
Yeah.
LinkedIn user just popped this in here, right? Is that the lack of standards in the MSP channel industry is scary, shocking, and staggering. Oh, it's Ian. Yeah, and that makes total sense. Hey, Ian Richardson, Tim Golden, bunch of people, Jess Bishop. Just want to say hey to everybody, Henry, Tim. But the point is that when you have no structure and what is good, it brings exactly what you're bringing up is, did I do more than that guy that got popped or gal that got popped?
Or did I not do enough and I'm next? Yeah.
Or did I not do enough and I'm still next and I was going to be next even if I did enough? It wouldn't have mattered, right?
Right.
That's kind of the challenge.
Stepping away from the security side of it, coming over to the vendor side, we're looking at it, and as we're building our software, we're literally trying to build something nobody's ever done in the MSP space before.
Yep.
And now going away from that security validation, now we have no validation except that we bring 10 partners together and go, hey, if we built something kind of like this, how would you like to see it behave?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, 8 out of 10 agreed. Maybe we should build that.
Right.
Is that gonna scale to the big guy? Is it gonna be
just consensus validation, right? Like that's essentially what you've done.
Really what we're going for.
Yeah.
And so it leaves you a lot of the time standing up here giving a sales pitch and wondering if when somebody buys this, it's going to deliver for them and it's going to land for them. And so, that when I heard you and Jason talking about it, I could definitely relate to the technical side of that. Sure. And then I put on my lifecycle hat and I went, it's no different today, doing what we're doing today. And yet I have hundreds of partners coming back and saying, the ability to deliver a budget to my client has solved a big problem for me. Great. I love it. I would pay.
Yeah.
When customers come to you and say, we don't pay enough, we should probably pay you more. That's validation, right? That should set it off.
Sure.
And it just doesn't. There's something about it. There's something about imposter syndrome that outlives all your validation.
Now that I'll give you, right? I think that's also one of those things where, and maybe I've learned to live with imposter syndrome. Maybe that is part of this, and maybe I'm just compensating. But the statement is like, for me, it's if I ever feel like I've lost that imposter syndrome, it's a barometer for me to know that I'm way above where I should be and I'm an idiot, right? Like I almost feel like if I ever get to the point where I call myself an expert,
right?
Yeah, it feels like arrogance. It almost feels like I've now accepted my right place at the top of the hill. And no, I don't feel that way about myself. I feel like a student. I feel like a servant. I feel like a carrier of a mission. And so I don't think my mission's accomplished, and therefore I haven't been successful, right? And so I feel like if I ever lose that, maybe I'm oversharing, I definitely would feel like I've lost my edge. And
I agree. No, I agree with you 100%. And I think, even over here on the sales side, every time I see a webinar on sales process or whatever, I go listen, understanding that I've had sales training for the last 30 years of my life.
Yeah.
I'm probably not going to learn a lot that's new, but I might learn something.
And I might be able to recontextualize something, right?
Yeah,
I might be able to understand something more and better able to articulate that and share that to someone else that's valuable.
Yep.
So Tim, Ian pops in and says, listen, that value prop, and he's speaking back towards my make you better, collaborate aspect of that from we'll keep it running, we'll be proactive, we'll do the blah, blah, blah. That value prop is commoditized now as well, Matt. Yeah, I agree. That's table stakes, right? Let's just be honest. As we go forward, that's table stakes. There needs to be a new discussion on what truly clients find value in, making sure people are delivering what their clients actually value, which kind of goes back to your statement, right? You had that really technical guy or gal that was out there talking, but the client didn't find value in that, right?
No.
Like they didn't. It was not valuable, nor would it be my doctor explaining how the nanograms per milliliter delineation shifts. No, just tell me at the end of the day, what does this mean to my overall ability as a business, as a body to continue businessing, right? Like, if you will. But yeah,
I
I
agree with
agree
that
with you,
100%.
Ian, for sure.
Yeah.
Taking a couple more comments real quick before we keep going. Bobby, you and I, like, twins separated at birth, in the sense that had Alex had something in his use and he was doing it and saying, I'm looking at CIS and going, oh, taking away admin rights, that's on the CIS. Okay, having security product. Okay, that is, oh my gosh, like, man, I'm at 62% and I have this roadmap in front. That takes away imposter syndrome in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm not saying it's gone, but having that kind of thing lets you at least say, here's the bell curve. Here's what that other guy is or isn't doing and got breached, back to Alex's point.
Right. Right.
And here's what I know: if I meet these standards, I've reduced risk to a certain point. That's kind of my point. It's harder to have imposter syndrome when, and I say this is under my opinion. I understand this is just my opinion, the way I see it, but I feel it harder to have imposter syndrome when you're living in a set of conditions that are pre-prescribed and measurable against a normal, right? That's kind of back to my conditions of imposter syndrome, is when there isn't a normal.
Right.
When there isn't this normalized piece, right? But Tim Golden popped out with a good one too, and he says, he said, "Riddle me this: is some imposter syndrome good?" And goes on to say, I know that I spend brain power comparing others to on a thing that isn't quantifiable. That's kind of back to my point, right, Tim? I think having imposter syndrome is a place that, if you are going to live on the edge, if you are going to live somewhere where you're a bit avant-garde, ahead of the market, whether that's self-ascribed or not, then I think embracing the imposter syndrome, guiding it to healthy places, like, maybe don't read every single article, but certainly spend time making sure that you can see your position and defend it as if you were attacking it, right? And make sure that you have some justification, validation methods.
Well, and I think that applies to anybody who's out in the public in any shape or form, trying to lead a conversation, right? If you're up there at the front of the room, somebody's going to challenge you eventually, or what you say is eventually going to get put to the test, and you're going to have to address it. And back to the conversation about CIS and frameworks, like, frameworks help you validate it a little bit, and then if you have real imposter syndrome, you go home and go, well, that framework was great, but it was built before the
maybe
RMM.
I applied it wrong, or maybe they didn't understand this piece, or
does it take my RMM tool and my RMM vendor getting breached into account, or is that just for Coca-Cola and Pepsi to use?
Which NIST CSF does not have a supply chain yet. They're adding it, but CISVA does, right? Like, so you have a big difference there.
So don't kid yourself. My imposter syndrome was tough enough that it could take down the best validations.
Yeah, 100%, right, brother? I love it. Good for you. Here's the other piece I'll talk about. So Einstein walked up to a chalkboard one day and he started writing equations. They were simple ones. 3 times 2 is 6, 4 times 2 is 8, 5 times 2 is 10, 6 times 2 is 13. And somebody stopped him and said, wait, Einstein, it's not 13, it's 12, silly. And I'm not getting the numbers exactly right for anybody that wants to take this to another level of irony. But the student said, you missed this one. Einstein turns around and paraphrasingly says, yeah, but I wrote 4 equations on the board that were absolutely correct, and not a single person said something about it until I made a mistake. Yeah. And I think that's the fear that Jessica's talking about, right? Imposter syndrome kept me from doing write-ups for the longest time. Part of that is because we're so afraid of being found wrong, or giving validation to my imposter syndrome, like proving I'm an idiot, removing all doubt that I'm the dumbest human in the world and I never should be doing this. Yeah. And so I think when you find yourself in that imposter syndrome, you almost get blocked sometimes from moving forward. Like, and I've read Jess's write-ups, right? She has a lipstick container with a Raspberry Pi attack tool in it that she did. And writing up about that was something she didn't want to do, presumably because of being afraid of somebody going, you're such an idiot. Look at this. This isn't even going to work. You didn't even understand this one thing. And I think that's one of the things where, when I say living in your imposter syndrome, it makes you very humbled to understand that you don't care if you're wrong. If you're able to say, you know what, I'm going to take all the evidence in front of me. I'm going to continue pushing forward. I'm going to believe in my correctness, and I'm going to believe in my own incorrectness, but I'm okay finding it to be incorrect and changing what I'm going to say next.
Well, as long as I can learn from it. Yeah, I think it's like, we have to accept the fact that it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to make a mistake if you own it and learn from it.
Yeah. Right? It's not okay to make a mistake and go, there was no mistake. No, this was great. It was fine. Everything's good. Yeah.
Everybody makes a mistake. It's how you react once you've done so, what you do after the fact, that makes it right. Yeah. And I think that's something that all of us who struggle a little bit can take a little bit of solace in.
Yeah. And I think that's the point, is that you also, on that same breath, as you're trying to pick holes in your own capability during imposter syndrome, and really kind of where I live my life, it's almost of checking to see if your work is good enough and finding it not to be, and continuing to grow. But you also, on the converse, have to try to find indicators of success, right? And I think that's the kind of point you said is, when my customers, when my partners come to me and say, hey, we were able to do X because of Y, it's anecdotal. It doesn't have any direct correlation. You haven't proved it. You haven't done the empirical analysis necessary of that. But what you have done is found a way to anchor into that and say, that's what I'm after. Those are the things I'm chasing. I want to make sure my barometer points me to where I'm driving success for someone else. And so you almost have to find external validation points, which is unhealthy if you're a psychologist, right?
Well, I never really tied these two together, but I was big on, little signs up in the wall somewhere on around my MSP.
Yeah.
We have all these little signs up on the wall, and they were, good reminders. One of them that sat over my desk said, if you have to do it twice, automate it.
Yeah.
There was one
which
that
I
said,
love that of yours. Yeah.
Yeah. There was another one that said, at the end of the game, the king and the pawn go back in the same box, which
Right.
was just
True.
always a good one to me. But the one that we always put out in the help desk was just a question, and it just said, how do we know that we're winning?
Yeah.
And it was probably just me trying to figure out some
Right.
empirical way to score whether or not what we were doing was right. Trying to figure out what winning looks like was actually a morning huddle conversation at least a dozen times over the course of a few years at my MSP.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that is an interesting correlation, right? That you were just reaching out to find those validations. And then the challenge becomes your validating audience can be devalued, right? And so what I mean by that is, like, let's say I find a validation and my validation is this audience that I now already find to be massively deficient from where they need to be. Their validation to me gets devalued to some extent.
You're not talking about this audience. You're talking about a different audience. The one that
not particularly this one. We're
all.
Not there here. The people listening here, no possible
amazing.
way.
Yeah, you guys.
Deficiency. Yeah.
No, but yeah, and again, take it back to your MSP days. Like, are the people that are in my company telling me that we're doing the right things because they're here and biased by being around me, by my leadership and taking them the wrong way?
Yeah.
Or are they free thinking enough and willing to stand up and tell me if they think I'm wrong?
Right. And well, and also if you had, let's say, that MSP customer going, you know what, you've made me the most secure. You've done the best. Have I?
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's the problem is that's what I'm kind of trying to pitch there is that if you're getting that validation from the ones that aren't able to do, that don't understand this, that haven't gone there, when you live in that out there on the edge kind of thing, when you're the guy screaming SSO has to be endemic in everything we do, we have to deal with these things. We have to be security if you're an MSP. You can't just be an MSP. You have to be security folk. When you say things like that, when I say things like that, right? If someone is there saying, yeah, agreed, it's confirmation bias. Yeah, thank you. Like, my buddy Brian Wheeler, like, just loaded this up perfectly, right? Confirmation bias is that you want the answer to be yes. You're successful, Matt, and you're doing a good job. And so the confirmation bias of that, the folks who were with me always seem to have it all together, right? I think that is this, you want it to be that way. And so you can find data. My brother's a data scientist, actually, Stephen Lee. He's an AI and natural language processing scientist researcher at University or Oregon State. But I was doing a Google search for something one day, and I was asking, is the COVID vaccine safe? Okay. If you write down the top 10 results of that question and then go Google search, is the COVID vaccine not safe? And look at the two outcomes, they will have a confirmation bias based on the way you asked the question. And he said what he always does when he's doing his research is he asks the inverse of each question and figure out which has more data. And essentially, so I know that's a thought, conversation that's separate, but it does speak towards confirmation bias, which, Brian, that wasn't our topic today, guy. This was about imposter syndrome, correlated, of course, to confirmation bias.
We're just digging in deeper.
I love this from Ian, right? And, these are people that I listen to when they speak, right? Alex, you speak of that. I listen to, Ian, I listen to a lot of these people as they speak. The truth will set you free. Getting people into a space where they put on their own owner of the store hat and give feedback is such a win. And I think that's kind of the point. You're asking them to sit in your shoes, and as much as they can understand the world you sit in that way. Bobby as well pops in. This is a heavy chat crowd today, guys.
Yeah.
This is great. Healthy leadership team is empowered to speak the truth helps a ton. Holy shit, Bobby. Like, you got the one cuss word out of me. I now owe Tim, Sinclair another breakfast, or Tim Choquette another breakfast. Right. But, 100%. Being transparent is very liberating. I use that as an armor. I don't mind telling people I face imposter syndrome. I don't mind sharing my failures. I don't mind talking about the things that have hurt me, that make me tear up, that make my skin crawl.
Right.
And I think the point is, if you empower people to be honest and transparent, then you help them live in that space a little better. Right?
I think that's something that's become more and more okay just in the last 5 or 10 years, like to be able to talk about these kind of things and be okay with it.
Yeah.
And I think there's a ton of value in that. Like if you can't become a little vulnerable,
Yep.
you don't really have the ability to grow.
Yeah.
And you really rob yourself by putting up that armor and not allowing anybody to see that you question yourself. You take away the ability for someone else to even come help you validate your opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. But, Ian just said it. And, of course, he's definitely taken one of my lines. I'm sure I've said this somewhere before, but no, I'm just teasing. Ian says, vulnerability is the secret ingredient to trust.
Now you're going to
And I
have to pay
think,
him a royalty for
yeah,
it.
I know
He
it
beat you to
sucks.
it.
I'll
Yeah.
be used. It's crazy, but, we've got a good trade, I think, going at this point. But, vulnerability is the secret ingredient to trust. And I think it also comes back to why genuine sells. Right? If you are your genuine self and you walk in to sell something, you explain your weaknesses, you explain your positives, you talk about why you think you need to be in this room, you understand what value proposition is, you understand what your weakness is and how you like. I'll take this all the way back. I used to help Continuum sell Continuum. And what I would do is Austin Roberts was my account manager. And I had this belief that if I could help them move product very publicly, explain the positives, explain the negatives, and people still bought, I could be very publicly nice about it and be a real dickhead in behind the curtains and say, use that revenue I just got you to fix this problem. Right? I could
Go
use
hire
that
a
as a
human to fix a thing.
yeah. And so
That's
I
awesome.
used that a lot. But what was so endearing, and I actually had a 100% close rate of the partners I met with about Continuum. The reason it was so endearing is I could tell them, here's what's great. Here's what sucks. Here's what really sucks. Here's how you combat 7 of the things that suck. Here's how you do better. When they walked in and bought that product, they didn't walk in with false pretenses. They knew the turd they were buying.
Yep.
Right. And they understood its value to them still. They understood. And I think that we often focus too much on this perfection view and don't live enough in the imperfection and interdependency aspect of our worlds, right? And just being humble and saying, yeah, I know that I wrote this software at a time that it wasn't practiced to have these security, constant development, integration pipelines happening. I have these problems. I'm dealing with them. I have to do this. These are the things I'm missing. Here's why I'm going to push this back. Like being transparent gives you a lot of ways to be genuine, and being genuine sells, right? At least in my opinion. It really does.
I mean, we have the core values that we've built Lifecycle Insights on are raving fans and transparency. And that's it. We will build raving fans of our customers by being transparent. The number 1 core value is fed by the number 2 core
but they
value.
can't be sycophants. And I think that's the balance, right, of this. Is they can't just be people that are telling you what you want to hear. I'm a raving fan. This is great. But they also then serve as just an empty validation structure.
Well, I've never seen MSPs that would hold back and not tell us if they weren't happy. So
fair,
I've been to Reddit. I know what that looks
like.
like.
Yeah. I wasn't picking you apart specifically, just making sure the understanding was there, right? Like, So I got a few more comments. I'm going to do this one first, just because Ian is teasing me, but he's not wrong. We kind of did have a competition of who could close more business for them. We really did both believe and sit on the advisory councils together and believed if we could drive enough revenue there, we could ask for the fixes in a way it couldn't be denied.
Yeah.
And I did take advantage of that a few times. I mean, I genuinely had them do things they would never do for another customer because I had leverage I'd built up. And I mean, I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean personal power or equity, however you want to define it. But yeah, perfect is the enemy of good. So he said greatness. And I think he's modifying the other piece of the platitude, but perfect is sometimes the enemy of good, or perfect is sometimes the enemy of greatness. Right. And that just being humble and getting it out there and getting it working and asking people to help. Like, do you know how many people don't ask for help? Like, you think you live with imposter syndrome. Well, go ask for help and ask someone to validate yes or no. Ask someone to help you look at this and make sure you're applying it right. Ask someone to pick it apart.
I was going to say, ask the inverse of it. Ask them to show you why you're wrong, right?
There you go, which is back to my Google search conversation on confirmation bias, right? Like specifically ask. But the point is, I don't turn many people down when they ask me for something, right? And I think I've found in my experience in life, when I ask for something, people don't say no either. And I think it's just we're wired to help. I think we want to help, but people are wired to be lacking humility necessary sometimes to ask for the help, even though they live in imposter syndrome, even though they're sitting there questioning whether they are an idiot or not, right? But anyways, I digress.
It's
Didn't read
not
this
always
one.
easy when you put yourself out in front of everybody. You know, when you're on camera all the time, when you're standing up in
Brother.
front of rooms, when you're standing up in front of groups, and people expect you to have every answer just like that. And you know, it's important not to forget that where we all came from is somewhere where it
Yeah.
was okay to say, I don't know the answer, but I'll get it and I'll get back to you.
It's funny. I was just watching a repost of a video I did from Ignite, with Ignite at a show, and I was talking about the FTC regulations and how those are changing, and they were talking about suing, people that lied, and I referenced FCC, and then when I was trying to come up with the, identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, I minced up my words, and like every time I watch it, I cringe, and I'm like, man, people are. And I've literally sat there in front of the keyboard and go, should I just call it out? Should I just say, gosh, I'm an idiot. Sorry about the FCC versus detect, protect, detend. And like, I genuinely have struggled. Like this was yesterday in the car. I typed it, deleted it, typed it, deleted it. Like I just wanted to say, guys, I'm an idiot, but I'm not that big of an idiot. Like I know I'm an idiot. I'm aware of this
Right,
failure.
right.
I'm aware. It's rough, man. 100%. And I don't think people understand how much I put myself through in my own self-judgment when it comes to my content or the things I say or the way I convey a thought or how I help someone, my experiential transfer. It's really tough, but Brian says folks love dealing with humans. They call they call when they can, email, which means they're willing to hear 95% success still has 5% oopsies. I think what he's trying to convey is like people do love dealing with the humanity of it, right? There's a reason I want an IVR that's always going to be perfect. And it might be because I think I can manipulate the system by talking to a human, right? I can't manipulate the UI.
Yeah, yeah. But sometimes I think it's because we think we can get some empathy too. Like, hey,
Yeah.
if I'm just sending an email, I don't get the ability to go, and we'll go back to the MSP. I don't get the ability to go, I know you guys are busy, and I know you don't have to get to this for 4 hours based on our SLA, but could you just hook me up?
Yeah.
I need to get back to work.
And even if it's a no, you can have some empathization that says, hey, I get you. I know where you're going from. I'm sorry. As opposed to this cold 1 or 0, right? Like press 1 to be hung up
We've
on
received
because you
your
don't
ticket.
meet this. yeah, 100%, right? A great point, Brian. And I think what's unique about humans is the fallacy. I think part of that understanding of everyone is looking, here, this comes back to a theory. Right. I get up and I do like tons of video presentations. I do tons of stand-up presentations. I think I'm on like 60 or 70 or something this quarter. Right. And so you get into that, like it's it's one of those things where it takes a lot to go up and be fallible and to do that. But really, once you get into it, I don't feel it anymore. I don't
No,
feel the nervousness of it. I don't
you
feel
get
any of
over
that.
it.
And what's great is to someone else, they almost put you on a pedestal because, man, I wish I could do that. And I wish I
Yeah.
could.
Oh yeah.
And so it's almost validating in its own right just because you do it. And I say all that not to be aggrandizing, but to really say, just keep being you. Like go do
When
things to check and validate you're right, but go
Marnie will tell
continue.
you how much I put her through when we first started this company and I did my first couple of presentations because it was new content to me. I wasn't used to going,
Yeah,
I
like
wasn't used to
sweating
going off of
bullets,
PowerPoint and this
horrified of it,
practicing
stumbling
it 17
everywhere.
times, stumbling through it.
Yeah.
And a startup that's, I mean, we're still very much a startup, but a startup that's just a little newer than us. I was talking to one of the founders over there and he says, I just don't know how you get up on stage and talk like that and do the things you do. And I'm really nervous to do that. And I said, let me tell you, I was at a Chris Weiser event, one of his 7-figure MSP events. I'm flipping through my slide deck and one of the slides came up and I had created them in Google Slides and I'm presenting it in PowerPoint. Well, when I exported, something got out of whack and part of the slide was off the bottom of the slide and I couldn't read it. And I flipped to that slide and I went, this, and I don't know what the heck that's supposed to say. So we're just going to keep going. And
I just moved on.
The room laughs. Nobody
Yep.
gave me a hard time about it. And I'll
Yeah.
remember it forever because I was like, oh my God, I felt so stupid. And nobody batted an eyelid. And everybody
what
still
helped
came
me
back
get
and
over
said, "Oh, we
that?
got pretty good content out of that."
Self-deprecating humor is probably one of the most endearing things in the world, right? Like people cringe at it too, but they also find the humanity in it. And so I used to fight a lot. I know it's hard to believe, but when you have two eyes that point in different directions and a sister that's handicapped and has a hand that does this, you kind of learn to fight a lot, like, at least in the beginning. But as I got to be older, I started making jokes about it, and I found that people found that endearing, and people loved it, and everybody knows about my eyes, and it's an endearing quality as opposed to a negative, right? Like I'll tell the story of how when I used to coach football, I would come down on this kid, and I go, "Hey, listen, you got to come down on this corner," and he'd go, Yeah, you little bastard. You know who I'm talking to, right? And where my Oakleys are pointing right now. But in reality, like as I learned to embrace that and make that something just like your failure on that slide and saying,
Yeah.
can't even read that one, mess that up next. It
Yeah.
shows such a confidence that others would rather have. I think it's almost one of those things where it's like, man, that person right there, I almost made a mistake there, but that person right there, they must be great and have their stuff together because they don't even mind when they make mistakes and they roll with the punches and they're okay with it and they're confident in their own skin. And that's what we all desire to be, right? That's the whole nature of imposter syndrome, is feeling you're
Well,
not.
you just have to look more confident than you are. That's the trick.
Yeah. Well, there's a reason con men starts with con, but for sure. So it does come down to having good ethics, right?
True story.
But Eddie says, and I love Eddie. Eddie and I go back way back, but only imperfections, it makes you relatable. True, right? Because everyone carries some degree of those imperfections. And good thing, or else I'd be terrible at presenting. LOL. Yeah, true story, brother. Which comes with
Yep.
its own disarming there. So as a cybersecurity sales guy with a passion for the InfoSec mission, I love listening to y'all talk about these instances because it really brings the humanity of folks forward. I often picture experts. I have to unhighlight it so I can read it. I often picture the real experts as the local wizard in the tower, unassailable and unapproachable. We all have our issues and insecurities. That's brilliant. And it's good when we can own them. And I think that's the point. We idealize the top. And so when we're chasing the top, we must think they've got it perfectly together. They must know all of these things. If we're in that edge and the 1% and I'm getting to where I'm an expert and I'm doing these things, why do I not feel like that expert I pictured up there?
The guy who's
because nobody's ever got it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the guy who's building the plane while he's flying it.
100%. He's at the top of the tower putting in bricks.
And they're just better at hiding it than us. So
it's brilliant.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to talk about this topic, because I feel like it's one of those where if we can get it out and joke about it and laugh about it and have a real conversation about it, maybe it helps somebody who's struggling with it the same way.
Brother.
At the end of the day, that's my goal. We move one more person forward,
which is
bit.
What your mission is, and it should be a validation statement in literally why you hold the hands you walk with. It's so perfect, man. That's awesome.
It's a true story.
Yeah, and somebody asked me, I haven't taken the time to write it yet on LinkedIn, but someone asked me and said, "Hey, listen, yeah, this is great, right? Remember the other person on the other side of the table is also a person, right? 100%." But I wanted to talk about this. I lost my train of thought. Ian, you're fired. Like that's it. Done. Just done. Failed. But no, I was going to say something and I lost it. But I think this is a great conversation. I think there's a lot of audience participation. Yeah, well, it was something in the correlation of, I hope somebody hears something and moves forward. I hope somebody hears this and understands it's okay. And I guess if we wanted to close it out with that would be my closing statement of, if you're living with imposter syndrome, it's probably a good sign. It probably means you're pushing your own envelopes, you're at the top of the tower putting a brick on, or you're doing something else. And if you can find absolute proof that's wrong, then that was a statement to help you change and correct course too. Well, but if not, embrace the wrong. Embrace.
I just want to add to that it probably means you hold yourself to a high standard, which is not a bad thing. So take it from that perspective. And I'll just say, if you ever feel like you need to talk about it, come find me.
Yeah, me too. 100%. Yeah. And I think one of the greatest things about life in general, maybe this is completely off topic, is we define our own level of success. Some of the happiest people I've ever met have none of the defined success that I continue to chase. Yeah. Right. And I think that the lesson to learn from that is try to live in that moment. Right. Try to live in that space. Yeah, certainly better than living with Stockholm syndrome. Thank you for adding the levity back. That's true. Big delineation. but understand that, you're living on the edge of something and you're building something. Define that as your success. Yeah. Define the fact that you're always questioning your own abilities, that you're always questioning those things. And that's why you find success, right? It's almost this cyclical aspect for me. And I've used my own imposter syndrome to continue to drive validation structures and or actual correcting courses where I'm wrong, where I'm abjectly wrong. Yeah. And then I need to change. So,
well, the more you talk, the more you get in front of audiences, the more you put yourself out there, the more you're going to be wrong.
Right? 100%. Make mistakes. Yeah, I make mistakes.
You're going to pull up a slide that isn't on the slide, and you're going to have to say something dumb. And
you're going to talk about something 9 slides early, and then go, "Damn it, I had that later in the slide."
That never happens to anybody.
No.
So the more you do it, the more you're going to make mistakes. But hopefully, the more you've armed yourself with what it takes to address those. Yeah. So.
Thanks for being here, y'all. I really appreciate it. This has been a very, very fun conversation.
Yeah,
so
me
thank
too.
you, Alex. I love you, brother.
Thanks for
appreciate
coming on, buddy.
Keep doing it.